Linda? Oh, great. Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar brought to you by the AIA Housing Knowledge Community and the Open Architecture Collaborative. Today, we'll be talking about participatory decision-making for co-housing. Excited about this webinar as it's near and dear to my heart. This morning, my name is Garrett Jacobs. I'll be facilitating today. I am a trained architect from New Orleans, now living in Oakland, and I'm the executive director of the Open Architecture Collaborative, helping designers around the world figure out how they can better do outreach and conduct community design practices with their local communities. And then today our panelist will be Mary Kraus, who has over 25 years of experience working with co-housing and sustainable community design. She was one of the first architects to build community co-housing in Eastern United States, has worked over 24 communities in North America, and also one of the first in Eastern Canada, one of the first co-housing communities as well as serving on the national board for the Cohousing Network and the Northeast Sustainable Energy Association. She currently runs her own consulting business for participatory decision-making. And fun fact, she has lived in a co-housing community for over 20 years, which she helped create. So she has really great firsthand experience of what she's going to share with us today. Some of the learning objectives are really just to gain a basic understanding of co-housing and the process of creating it, learn some of the methods that Mary uses to facilitate and lead large groups of stakeholders in making decisions together to really form something that they're going to own together. An understanding of the short and long-term emotional and physical, and I assume psychological benefits of the participatory process for designing something as a community, and then understanding the importance of compassion for the architect in the facilitation role of co-housing and just generally creating something together in a community. So that also kind of outlines the course description. You can read a little bit more about that here. But really, whether it's urban or rural, understanding how it's centered around pedestrian environments and promoting chance encounters and conversations that really create more opportunities for individuals to build connection with one another and for the community as a whole. And then talking about some of those shared amenities and a little bit about the co-housing movement, which came over from Denmark. If you have logistical questions, feel free to type them into your question box. We'll kind of read them out towards the end of the session. So go ahead and ask questions as they come. I will ask them to Mary towards the end. And again, here's some copyright materials from the AIA and compliance statements. Please don't use this without permission, and please give credit where credit is due. And with that, I will share the screen with Mary. And again, if you have questions, please do so as they come up, and I will ask them at the end.
Okay, thank you, Garrett. So, yeah, participatory design is the topic here. Oops, are you seeing this okay?
Not yet. Give us a moment. Okay, it's pulled up. If you want to put it in full screen mode.
Yeah, that's weird. I had it in full screen mode and it jumped out. What is this doing to me? There we go. We're back.
Perfect.
Okay. Yeah, so the participatory design process is most of what I'm going to talk about, a design process that I've evolved for housing communities specifically, but which is applicable to other projects where you have members of stakeholders that you want to work with to make constructive decisions. And you'll see why I'm saying it's not only an efficient but an enjoyable approach to running workshops. I am going to start with, I might need you to, okay, hold on a second. Sorry, I'm getting another problem here where it doesn't want to make me jump from, there we go. Okay, we're begin with, are you okay there? I can't hear you. Sorry? So what, can I go ahead? Hello, Gary?
Yeah, sorry, you're just getting a little feedback.
Or,
Go ahead, go ahead.
okay, so what is co-housing? I just want to start with that. So co-housing, it's a form of community or neighborhood housing model that was imported from Denmark in the 1980s when Katie McCann and Chuck Durrett wrote a book called Co-Housing, and communities have begun to be developed in the U.S. since that time, the late 80s. And it provides a sense of community balanced with the privacy of the individual home. So co-housing communities are centered around the pedestrian environment. I think, Garrett, you alluded to that, where there are chance encounters. Dave Jackie, a landscape designer I've worked with on co-housing, likes to call it random connections by design. And from rural to urban environments, these work. The common house is one of the central parts of co-housing. So everybody has their individual home, but there are also shared facilities, most notably in the common house, where residents will share meals, typically a couple dinners a week, maybe some brunches, and various amenities such as guest rooms and the kids' room and so on. So these communities are designed and managed and maintained by the people who live there. And by design, I mean they participate in the design. So that begs the question, how do 20 to 30 unrelated adults design their community together? Okay, so here's the history of how I came to this process. After working with a number of co-housing communities, I kind of got tired of dragging people through the same process of rediscovering the wheel. Your common house needs to be in a central location in the community. You need a kitchen in your common house to cook the common meals, etc. So working with co-housing communities centers around these participatory workshops, and I'll tell you a little bit about the goals, but as I tell you how the workshops unravel, I want to bear in mind that this history of what I'm attempting to do is not drag people through the same reinvention process, but at the same time have them participate richly. So the main goals of these participatory workshops, which are usually weekend-long workshops, are to develop a design program with both your general and specific programmatic requirements, either for the common house site or for the community site or the common house or the individual units. There are also some other workshops that I run, for instance, on how to come up with a work system because people in the community, everybody works, either cooks or plows snow or whatever. How do you come up with a work system? So you'll see some slides that have to do with workshops that are not specifically design related. So design program, design direction. So when it is a design workshop, you're coming up with a basic design concept, a partie for the site design or common house design, etc. But a third goal is community building, getting people to connect with each other positively and make decisions in a positive, supportive environment where they feel comfortable with each other, they feel willing to take a risk and speak from the heart and say what they really want, and get their needs met, but also listen to the needs of their community mates, their future neighbors. So the steps in these workshops, the first step is an online survey that I send out in advance of the workshop. From that survey, I developed an agenda which includes a preliminary draft of a design program. So I'm already giving them a suggested design program or part of a suggested design program before we get into the workshop. And then there's a slideshow, which is a marketing opportunity for building their group, but also an educational piece. Then we get into the weekend workshop, and from there evolve the schematic designs, often in collaboration with a local architect with whom I charrette on the following Monday following the weekend workshop. So the survey that I send out ahead of time contains a bunch of different kinds of items. It includes information. So one thing just is a new educational piece just to explain to people this is the background. So here, and this is one of the slides that deals with the community work system rather than design. But it explains to the group, okay, different communities set up their meals systems different ways. Here are some ways that different communities do it. It's just background information. Then there are, excuse me 1 second, I'm going to see if this is Garrett trying to phone in. Is this Garrett?
No, go ahead. You're fine.
Am I? Okay. But you just, okay. Is it coming through?
Yeah, you're fine.
Okay. So, you want me to keep, okay. Sorry about that. Okay. So the survey also includes suggested programmatic elements. So this is where I didn't, I'm saving people from reinventing the wheel. I'm sharing with them what I know about co-housing, about living in co-housing, designing co-housing. These are some things that I suggest for a community of their size and location and vision, whatever I already know about their community. So, in this main outdoor gathering area, you want it to be in front of the common house, you want it to be, a certain size of hardscape, you want it a comfortable microclimate, etc. And then they have a place to comment. They can add something, subtract something. Maybe they don't agree with one of the things that I've written down. So that's their chance for feedback. And they can also just say, okay, great, this makes sense to me. I don't want to add any comment. And then there's the questions, different kinds of questions. Versus there's things, the recommendations are the things that I know about co-housing that I can recommend. And then there's the things that I couldn't possibly know about the group. For instance, what are your overall goals? What's more important to you? Having a safe environment for children, ecological sustainability, accessibility, affordability. I mean, all these things are probably important to most groups, but where are their priorities? I mean, some groups are much more focused on accessibility versus ecological sustainability, for instance, and I can't invent that priority for them. That has to come from the membership of the group. And, as well as, for instance, what rooms do you want in your common house? How many guest rooms do you want? Do you want to have a movie room or something, kids' playroom? What's important to you? And then, some more specific questions. For example, accessibility in the common house kitchen. It might not be required by code, but this might be a group that really wants to make sure that it's highly accessible in the kitchen. Or there might be disagreement about that, but this is how we're going to find out. So the survey goes out, and then when it comes back in, obviously, I get to analyze it, and that's where I really get a sense of the group and get a sense of where is their agreement and where is there a wide range of opinions. So, for instance, in this question, do you want to have 10-foot ceilings in the common house or in the great room? It probably is. It looks like the great majority of people are saying definitely or probably. There's nobody who's against. I mean, there's one person who's probably not, but there's nobody who's strongly against it. So I'm just going to propose it as part of when I hand out the draft design program. I'm just going to say, okay, here you go. This is what I'm recommending based on your feedback. But conversely, here's a question about should there be separate nooks in the great room for a separate quiet dining experience. And, there's a range. There's the people who say yes, people who say no. So that should be put on as a discussion item or possibly an exploration item when they're looking at thematic plans, which we'll get to in a minute. So based on that feedback, before the workshop, I send out an agenda as well as a draft design program, which looks something like this. And so there you can see in black, that's the programmatic language that people already saw in the survey that I had already recommended. And then in red are the changes that I've put in there based on the group's feedback. And then in yellow are discussion items. Should there be a patio or a deck? There obviously was a range of opinion about that. Should there be a screen porch included? So out of the agenda, out of the survey comes an agenda for the workshop. But again, the workshop begins, you've done a lot of work before the workshop. So first of all, the group had my recommendations. They didn't have to reinvent that. And then they have a second group of recommendations based on their input. And they can see, they get to see the collated surveys. They get to see why I'm suggesting some of these things based on feedback. Some of these things might not be their preference, but they might see that all of their neighbors wanted a certain thing, and I'm proposing it. I'm proposing the patio or the open deck because everybody wanted it except maybe this one person who didn't have a strong feeling one way or the other. Okay. So the workshop, that leads us up to the workshop. So it starts with a slideshow on Friday night, and then the workshop, and we'll go a little more into all of these things. So the workshop starts with some kind of introduction and group building, usually a guided visualization where I'm walking people through their community or through their common house, and they're sharing their dreams and images with each other, and we identify commonalities, various discussions and exercises to reach consensus on the issues that I had identified as discussion issues. And then the block exercise where they're actually working on design of the community. After that, the schematic design by the architects, which is usually myself and local architect after the workshop. So the slideshow, as I said, is an educational opportunity. It's also a great marketing opportunity to grow the group. And for a different kind of project, it might be to publicize the project to the neighborhood and so on, various stakeholders. So that's how we kick off the weekend. And then when we start Saturday and Sunday on the workshop, one of the important things to start with are ground rules. So this sets up front what the expectations are about how we are going to behave during the meeting. So nobody's surprised. Emotions are okay, aggression is not. That's maybe kind of obvious, but maybe not. And important to say, so it's all right for people to feel scared or angry or upset, but not to be aggressive about it. Other things that are important, when in doubt, facilitator decides. That means when in doubt about the process, the facilitator gets to decide. So we're not going to spend half an hour deciding, talking about what the process is going to be. Stay on topic. So I let people know ahead of time. Don't take it personally if I ask you to stop talking. If I think what you're saying is not on topic, I'm going to move things on. And then some other things like let other people speak before you speak again so that we get a variety of participants. So another thing that we work on in the workshop is defining the overarching goals. That's often one of the first things we do. So that's just something that you can refer back to throughout the design process, past the workshops and all the way through the construction. What are the group's priorities? And that's always an important thing to refer back to. I just want to bring your attention to these group works cards. They're just some interesting cards that have different concepts about working together in groups, and sometimes we'll hand those cards out and people will read them, and it just reminds people how to work constructively together and build community. So some of the exercises, often we'll do a site analysis where we have people walking around the site and kind of internalizing. If we're holding the workshop close to the actual site, people can get that connection and internalize some of the feelings about the site and the criteria. As I mentioned, the guided visualization is often something we do. And then various kinds of discussions. In large groups, sometimes we break into small groups, so maybe groups of 5 or 6 people are discussing a topic together and then reporting the results back, and then we try to figure something out from there by looking at each group's results. Spectrum exercise is an interesting one. There's one pictured at the bottom. So, for instance, let's say we're talking about, do you want to have home offices in the community? And some people think it's a great idea, some people think it's a terrible idea, some people are neutral. Stand on one side of the room if you hate the idea, you can't stand it, you think it's terrible. Stand on the other side of the room if you think it absolutely has to happen. You can then visualize, as you see with this picture below, you can visualize how many people are sort of on which side of the issue or neutral or how strongly they feel about it. And then we have people talk from different sides of the spectrum. And it also gets people up and out of their seats to move around if they're getting tired just sitting still for too long. Prioritization is another kind of exercise that I use frequently. So what's more important, the guest room or the kitchen? And often using index cards, we will move them up and down relative to each other to figure out which elements are the most important. Sometimes an image board, which might be assembled from images from the group to get a sense of what imagery people like. Another exercise is sort of taking a temperature. So we might be having a discussion, and sometimes it helps to just narrow things down. So on this topic, again, let's say, let's have home offices in the community. I love it. I like it. I don't like it, but I can live with it, or I can't live with it. And those are kind of some, it's an important way to frame it, because if you just say yes or no, you don't understand the temperature, how strongly people feel about something. And this is sort of the difference, I think, between straight voting, for instance. You don't get the nuance about it's very different if you have a bunch of people who can't live with something versus you have a bunch of people who love it and a bunch of people who like it, and maybe a few who don't like it, but it's not a big deal. So those are anyway. It's very different than just a strict yes or no. And then finally, the block exercise, which is the most fun part of the site and Common House design workshops. And this, of course, is the site design workshop. So I have people working with blocks that are to scale. Sometimes they're flat, sometimes they're townhouses, either on sometimes 3D, sometimes just a flat rendition of the site. And people get to work together to come up with concepts for their site plan. It's a lot of fun for people. It also is very helpful to the architectural team because people, I mean, this is sort of a side benefit. People get to see the challenges, and they don't come back to the team months later and go, well, why can't you have everything face south and have enough parking? They internalize the challenges themselves of how difficult it is to get everything that you want and need in a site plan. And they also get, obviously, ownership of it. And what happens then is they come up, and this is the Common House version of the block exercise. So they have, obviously, sheets of paper that are to scale, and they get to come up with designs. And then out of those designs, at the architectural team, so that's typically me. I usually will have a local architect or landscape architect attend the workshop, or at least this part of the workshop. And so we look at all the different designs, and then we break them down into concepts, and we get the group's feedback on those concepts. And which ones do they like the best? Do you like the courtyard concept? Do you like the linear concept? And the group decides which direction they want us to go. So as architects, we'll do a synthesis of, on the top right there, that's quite a decade back, and it was, when the group went over all the designs they had come up with, they had done a lot of courtyard designs, actually, so that was the one that we synthesized from there. And, of course, if there's ever kids in the group, they always come up with something much more interesting than we do. And then after the workshop, I charrette with a local architect, and they take it from there. And, of course, something more detailed ensues. And ideally, I am kept in the loop throughout the entire project as through design development and construction documents and so on, just to keep reviewing the plans and make sure that they're on target for co-housing. For instance, a co-housing kitchen has very particular design requirements, and they're not the same as another commercial kitchen would be, for instance. So the products after the workshop, again, I'll work with a local architect, and they will usually be the ones to present back one or more schematics based on the outcome of the workshop. And I will send out a finalized program that's based on the group's decisions over the course of the weekend and built upon the proposed program that we started with at the beginning of the workshop. But it's more specific. And most of the questions have been answered. Yes, everything is now in black and white. Everything's been consolidated, all the decisions. There may sometimes still be some outstanding questions that just have to be deferred to design development. And then, of course, the designs evolve based on the program, and the program is a document then that we can refer back to throughout the process. And when I'm reviewing plans of the local architect, obviously I have the program to refer back to, the group has the program to refer back to, everybody has this document that they can refer to make sure they're staying on track with their goals. And as I mentioned, consulting throughout design and through until construction. So what I want to conclude with is compassion, and I'm sort of saying it's the secret ingredient, because most of what I described to you there is a methodology, but what I realized, these people are building community, and what I like to say, if I'm doing my job right, I am helping these future neighbors to build their social community in the process of designing their physical community. And if I can hold them all with compassion while they're making these challenging decisions together, I mean, they're making decisions about their future, about where they're going to live. It's not just a couple trying to design a house. It's 20, 30 unrelated adults trying to design their homes and their community together. And so, holding them during that process, helping them to feel comfortable, being open even and especially to anyone who might be challenging during the process, who's maybe putting on the brakes or making it difficult. Really tuning into their needs, their wants, and helping everybody feel heard together. And so that's pretty much it. I think we're ready for questions.
Excellent. Thank you, Mary, so much for sharing your experiences over doing this for 25 years and how you've really created a process that is very clearly articulated and understood. I'll start by asking some of the questions from the audience today. And the first one really asks about how is the group of participants or residents selected? And I'd like to go a little bit deeper. And how is some of this kind of set up in terms of the financial model of the project? What's the impetus? And then how are the people, kind of brought in together, and how is that financed? Or is there some other process that started before there's already a group of people?
Right. So typically the group starts themselves. There have been some development team-driven co-housing. I mean, I actually initiated a co-housing community in Northampton, Mass, which I can tell you about that too. But usually it's a group of people, or maybe even one individual or one family that wants to start a community. And they start spreading the word, either word of mouth, or they post ads, or they, obviously put their community on the co-housing website, cohousing.org. You should know that website, anybody who's interested in co-housing. So, it started by, a group of people who want a neighborhood, whether they want a safe environment for their kids, or they want a nice place while they're aging, or they just want to be around people. And then they promote it. And at some point, it usually starts, the very beginning, it might be somewhat informal with maybe $20 here or there to, for promotional expenses. But at some point, there needs to be a real contribution, perhaps held in escrow. But, $2,000, $5,000, it depends on the group and the location. So there's typically equity members and associate members. I mean, every group's a little bit different, but so once the group forms and becomes more real, people decide, okay, I'm in this for real. I want a house. I want to be in this community. I'm going to start contributing actual funds. And so that's an equity member. But then they're going to have people who are interested, who are associate members, who are, yeah, I think I want to join, but I'm not sure yet, but I want to participate in meetings. So there's usually a tiered structure like that. And then maybe even people who are just exploring, interested and want to listen in on a meeting or something. Mm-hmm. So, and then there's more money that you contribute over time. I mean, like just as an example, the group that and then there's developer initiated. So I initiated a group because a developer I knew was putting in an RFP for a site where, whatever, let's just say a good site for co-housing, and I approached him and said, can you do co-housing as part of your proposal? And he did, and he was successful in his RFP. And so then we did a sort of marketing campaign, if you will, where we had some promotional meetings where we, an article in the paper and so on and so forth, where we essentially said, here's this opportunity. This is what co-housing is. Here's this site. Here are the goals of the developer. We're going to do all net zero energy homes, et cetera. Are you interested? And a group formed. But usually, that's a little bit unusual. Usually the group forms first. So again, but I was going to say, in our case, we started out with a $5,000 deposit. So it started with maybe $2,000, and then you put in $750 a month until you're up to $5,000. And that was the first deposit to get going on the workshops and the design. And often what happens is whoever joins first gets the first choice of unit. So who motivates them. And sometimes there's even economic incentives for joining early and so on. But anyway, is that good enough?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, that's very clarifying. I'm going to ask another follow-up question from the group. From a zoning viewpoint, what's the general reception attitude towards the concept of co-housing? And have you encountered any resistance? And if so, how have you dealt with it?
Right. It depends. It totally depends. I mean, urban environments are generally going to be more easier than rural environments in terms of zoning, but they've got their own challenges. I mean, one thing some towns are very pro this kind of development and others are not. So one good strategy, if you have hearings with the town, is for the membership of the group to show up, because then people see who it actually is, as opposed to having this, the monster under the bed, who are these crazy people who are going to move in next door, whatever their image is about what the problem is going to be. So it depends. And some zoning is not, as you know, some zoning is, it doesn't even, so there's attitude about, the town or the neighborhood, whether they're favorable or not favorable. But there's also the zoning bylaws. And as you know, some zoning bylaws are centered around lot developments, which makes you spread houses out too far to be co-housing. So there's different mechanisms. I know in Massachusetts we have 40B. What are the words? I'm trying to think what the words are behind that would make it interesting. Anyway, if a town doesn't have enough affordable housing, a developer can come in and supersede the zoning and or override the zoning in order to provide affordable housing. So that's a mechanism. It's called 40B, but whatever. Every state's different. But it's a mechanism by which you can provide more clustered housing.
And do you find that co-housing is ever used for more affordable housing scenarios?
Some co-housing has affordable housing. I mean, for instance, we have used the 40B process to provide affordable housing in co-housing. And that has been, at least the projects I've been involved with, affordable to 80% median income. So, and I would say the co-housing movement does sort of kick itself about not having enough affordable co-housing. there is an interesting example. I might as well share this while you're talking about affordability. There's a community out in California. I forget what town, what city, but that is an affordable co-housing. I think it's rental, and apparently one of the interesting things there is the elder population is stable, but the younger population is not, because you'll get, say, a single parent with a kid who qualifies income-wise and partners up with somebody or gets a better job or whatever, and then, you know, they're not an affordable house anymore. They have to move out of the community. So that's just one interesting thing. But there are various communities around the country that have, you know, some affordable components. I mean, my home community, Pioneer Valley Co-Housing, we had 10 affordable units. When we moved in, we've had a hard time maintaining them to be as affordable, because even though the sale price is tied to the appraisal, the housing costs in Amherst have gone up dramatically.
Gotcha. Thank you. Maybe for this next question, pull from experiences while you were on the board of the National Co-Housing Organization, but which areas in the U.S. are these projects most used, or is co-housing more popular? Have you found different areas?
Yeah. I mean, it's starting to cover the whole country and all of North America, but the places where it came first, and perhaps where there are more, the coasts and Colorado. I mean, there's a great Wonderland Hill development in Colorado that just Jim Leach, who has just been fantastic for the co-housing movement. He's done a lot of co-housing out there. You know, California, and also, you know, so East, Massachusetts does have a lot. I mean, Northeast, college towns, you know. So, but it's all over. You know, it'd be interesting to look. I think there's about 160 or something in the country right now. I forget if that's the U.S. or North America. But you know, it'd be interesting to see which states we're in and not in at this point.
Right, and if there are, you know, specific laws that make it easier or more difficult to make co-housing happen.
Yeah. I mean, again, you know, zoning, as I said, zoning in big cities tends to be, yeah, right. I mean, I haven't analyzed that in different states. I mean, certainly different, you know, rural versus urban, there's different issues that come up.
So thank you. For this next question, I'm going to shift the conversation to how architects get involved in this. And so, you know, how would, you know, more socially focused architect get involved with co-housing projects? And then I'm going to ask a follow-up leading question of, you know, what kind of skills do you think that we're not given, or that we might need to develop to do this work appropriately that we might not get in traditional architecture school?
Yeah, so nonviolent communication, if people have heard of that, that's something to look up. Facilitation skills, you know, ability to work with a large group. You know, so I think the facilitation skills are, I mean, they're really key, obviously. And nonviolent communication would be a good thing to look up and study and practice because it can be challenging. I mean, you have to you know, be willing and able to work with a multi-headed client and to be patient with them. I mean, I love it. Not everybody. Some people are like, "Are you kidding?" I would hate to do that. You know, I mean, it's for some people. Some people are into it. Some people are not. You know, the facilitation piece. I mean, there's also the design piece. You know, understanding community and what kind of designs promote community. So, I mean, that may be taught in architecture school these days. I mean, I know when I went to school, I designed a sustainable community, and that was really esoteric and bizarre, but, you know, it's not anymore. So, you know, I mean, certainly anybody who wants to get involved in co-housing architecture should read the co-housing books by Katie McCann and Chuck Durrett. go to the go to cohousing.org and just check out the website. Go to the conferences. There's a conference coming up in Nashville later this month. So anybody who's interested, definitely go to the conference, talk to people. The co-housing professionals will be there. It's a small field. There's sort of a handful of us that are expert in this, just because whatever. It's still a small pond. But that's the place to go to meet the co-housing architects who are working in this field. So.
Cool.
Oh, and there will be people there too, talking about group process and things like that, so you can meet people there as well who work on sociocratic governance and nonviolent communication and all those things.
Excellent. Thank you for those resources. A couple of the other questions involve more of the process. Someone is asking about how are the rules set for the community meetings, as well as, are common meals required, or how are kind of those things decided upon, and is that part of the design process as well?
Right. How the rules are set. You mean the rules for once you move in?
No, I think this is asking about the rules for the design meetings themselves.
The design meetings. Okay, I didn't know if you meant the design meetings or the, running the community meetings, which happen about monthly once you move in. Yeah, as I said, I post the ground rules, and that's something I learned from Laird Schaub, who is someone in intentional community he's a facilitator and consensus consultant, etc. But anyway, for the meetings that I run, I set up ground rules and ask for agreement. The group might refine them, but I need to let people know that I can't function if they have side conversations because it's too distracting for me when I'm facilitating. Or when in doubt, the facilitator decides. Because as I said, I don't want the group to bog down in an hour-long discussion about whether we should be meeting in small groups first or doing a spectrum exercise or whatever. I'll take a few suggestions, but I don't want to bog down. I want people to understand up front the thing that I said about emotions are okay and aggression is not. That it's part of modeling a positive way of getting along. That you're allowed to feel angry, but do it with an I statement. I feel angry when I hear this, not you're a jerk. So yeah. So I set that up, and I would encourage groups to set that up too. And again, I have a point person in the group when I'm doing this kind of work. So, obviously they might advise me of some other ground rules. One of the ground rules that's different in every group is who gets to participate. So, more typically equity members can block consensus and nobody else can. But, often associate members, people who are interested and thinking about joining, their input is welcome because they're the market. They're if they get what they want, people like them or people who are attracted to the group, their opinions are important. If they haven't invested money and they're not, definitely going to live there, so they don't get to block consensus. But some groups don't even let, and anyway, different groups do that differently. Some people don't want the associate members to participate. And I remember working with a group years ago that people who were not equity members could listen and then just comment at the very end of the day, which I know at least one or more of them found frustrating. But groups get to decide.
Gotcha.
Was there more? Oh, you said how do they decide how many meals they're cooking?
No, I just questions about what is mandatory and what is kind of voluntary for participation in terms of the group programming. How is that decided?
Yeah. Oh, you mean so whether people have to get to whether everybody has to be at the programming workshop?
Mm-hmm. Well, no, even further from the workshop then, in the programming of the space. So, for example, there's another question that I think talks about this. Is there an HOA for common maintenance of grounds or buildings? So talking about kind of the long-term participation.
So now we're talking about after we move in. So
Sure.
I'm hearing a couple of questions. One's the participation during the workshop, and one is after. I mean, one thing that I like to say is that, you know, whoever's participating, people, it's highly encouraged for people to be at, as many as people as possible, to be at the participatory design workshops. Not everybody can make it, and not everybody can make it for the whole weekend. But people need to live with the decisions that the group comes up with. So, you know, if you're not there and the group decides to, you know, have 2 guest rooms, you don't get to come back later and reopen that decision. I mean, unless there's some really pressing piece of information that people didn't have. I mean, at least that's how I, every group's going to be different, but that's how I recommend that groups act. And in terms of, yes, the homeowners, yeah. So, I mean, most co-housing communities are set up as condos, and there's a condo association. But, you know, really, I mean, there's, you know, various agreements. There are agreements about, and every community is different. It's quite interesting, but there are agreements about what's expected in terms of doing work in the community. And I do a whole workshop or a whole presentation on community work systems. It's kind of fascinating because it breaks down into what is the work of the community. So in other words, do you have snow, and if you do, are you plowing it or are you hiring that out? For instance, you know, is that a community job? So what is the work of community? What's the expectation around how, you know, who does what work and how, and then how do you enforce it, or do you enforce it? I mean, those are kind of like 3 different dimensions of it. So, you know, the group has to decide. So how many meals we're going to have a week? That gives you a big impact on what the work of the community is. Because cooking meals and cleaning up after meals is a lot of the community work. Some communities divide out their meal system as a separate system in terms of who has to work, and, you know, like if you want to eat, you have to work, I mean, that sort of thing. Other communities feel like the meals are such an important part of the community that everybody should, you know, that should just be part of the main work system. Let's see, enforcement. So just to say a little bit, I mean, I'll give you the example of my community. We have an expectation of working 6.5 hours a month. And if you're head cook for a meal, that's 6 hours. So if you do that once a month, you've almost done your whole community work. If you help on a cook team, so cook teams would typically be like 3 people. So if you help on a cook team, that's 3 hours of work. If you clean up, if you're on a cleanup team, which is typically 3 people, you'll, you know, that's 1.5 hours of work. Anyway, there's snow plowing, there's cleaning the common house, there's gardening, there's landscaping, there's all kinds of jobs in the community, there's work days. And, you know, so some communities might have a sign-up sheet where you sign up every month, or they might have work teams where you're on a team and every team rotates through different jobs. So one week it's team A's turn to cook, and then the next week it's their turn to clean up, and then the next week that team gets to do landscape jobs, and the next week they get to clean the common house, and the next week they get break, whatever. And then other communities have task teams, or what we call affinity teams in my community. So, you know, the team that cooks dinner every second Wednesday of the month, or the team that does gardening, or the team that does a couple of teams that do common house cleaning. So there's, you know, and then other communities just have a sign-up sheet or some kind of computerized sign-up where, you know, people sign up for their preferred slots, and then it gets selected what they get to do for the next few months or something. So those are a bunch of different ways. I know I'm giving you a lot of information here, but there are a lot of different ways that communities connect the person to the job. There's also just volunteer. You know, here's all the jobs, do them, you know, and hopefully they get filled. I think in most communities, there's a couple of people who don't work. You know, it's just sort of, you know, you get 90 people together. There are going to be a few people at any given time, either for whatever reason they don't want to work, or they're too busy, or they're sick, or, you know, whatever. And some communities do a pay or play. If you don't work, you have to pay. Other communities, in our community, we have what we call a hub. It's a committee that coordinates all the work, and every person in the community has a point person on the hub, And so, if, let's say I'm not working, I haven't been working all year, my point person could come to me and say, I noticed you're not working. Why are you not plugging in? Is there something, so I might say, well, I work, 12 hours a day and I'm never around. And they might say, well, we need somebody to lock the common house. Can you do that?
Mm-hmm.
They have a conversation. And it might result in me working or it might not. And personally, my opinion is it's really not a big deal. I have a couple of people who aren't working and they're actually missing out on the community work and connection.
No,
but it does, yeah.
That's what. Thank you for sharing all that. I think that the definition of co-creating what work is for a particular group of people is something that's really special, and isn't really done probably in the family unit as much as it should be. So that sounds like something that's really special. Transitioning kind of from that programming and participatory part of sustaining the community to then just kind of the value of the units and then transitioning them over, if someone wants to move out and move back in, how is that really handled? How is it kind of the initial value established and then transitioned?
Well, different communities, valuing is a whole other thing. Let me deal with the transition piece. I mean, different communities do that differently. In some communities, people are just allowed to sell their units on the open market. In our community, which I recommend doing something like this, we maintain a waiting list. And when a community goes up for sale, the community has the first right of refusal for a set period of time.
And when you say whole, do you mean whole community or individuals within it?
I don't get your question.
Like, what you mean the whole community goes up for sale, like the whole property is for sale?
No. It's a unit. So if someone in the community wants to sell their unit. Okay. In my community, we have a system that I recommend. I think it's a good system for maintaining community, which is that if a unit goes up for sale, the community as a whole has the first right of refusal. And what we try to, and by that I mean we have the right to find a buyer. And what we stipulate is that anybody living in the community has the first right. So if person A wants to sell their unit, anybody else in our community can move to that unit. Gotcha. Or, if there's a couple that's splitting up, one of them can buy that unit. So they have anybody in the community has first dibs, and then it goes to people on the waiting list, on our waiting list. And then if after a certain amount of time, I think it's 30 days, but I think it would be better if it was 60 or 90. If after a certain number of days we can't find somebody that we as a community have brought in or whatever, it's really the other way around, somebody who has not come to us as a community wanting to live here, then it can be sold on the open market. And so somebody could sell it to someone who doesn't even care about co-housing but thinks, oh, this would be a nice neighborhood for me. I don't really want to work or do anything, but sure, I mean, not that that's really okay because they're supposed to follow the agreements if they move in. But the point is, we're constantly building a waiting list.
Mm-hmm.
Because the value units, like you mean like the resale value?
Correct.
Yeah. So I don't know what most communities do. I know I don't know how many communities have actually tried to limit the resale value of units. We did, but we came up with a formula that ended up not being effective because what we did is we linked the proportion between the appraised value and the sale value, and the original appraisal and the original sale value. When you go to resell your unit, you get it appraised again, and you can't sell it for a greater percentage of appraised value you bought it for than it was originally bought for. And we thought that was going to keep the units inexpensive because we put a lot of sweat equity into this community, and the appraisals should have been higher than what we actually, the dollar amount that we paid for them. But we were the first co-housing community in the East, and the appraiser had never seen co-housing before, and I think what the appraiser ended up doing was just basing the prices on essentially on the purchase and sales, or so, I don't know, but they ended up being close to 100%. So yeah,
Right.
I mean we can't at least have sort of a bidding war kind of thing, but we can certainly go for close to 100%.
Right. Well, thank you for taking the first dive and setting the precedents so that in future appraisers will have better understanding of everything that's involved. Just to round us out, I have a couple really quick logistical questions that people ask. One is for the facilitation technique. What's a stack of four? We had that a couple times.
Oh, yeah. That means people raise their hands, and I go 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'm going to call on them in that order. And then once I'm done with those 4 people, we might take hands again. So it's instead of having an endless stack. Sometimes in facilitation, you can keep adding to the stack when people raise their hands, and it becomes this really long stack. And by the time you get to the 10th person, the conversation has gone off in another direction. So it's taking 4 people, maybe summarizing their comments or asking another question based on what they said, and then opening it up to hands again.
Right. A great facilitation technique. And then finally, just have you, in terms of construction with our last minute, have you ever seen prefabricated co-housing go up around the country?
I mean, the only one I can think of, I know Cambridge Co-Housing did some kind of, it's some kind of prefab. I mean, it's like the main building is a 4-story building. So it's not like prefab, freestanding, that kind of prefab. But and I don't know if others have. They probably have. I just don't know off the top of my head. There's no reason why not.
Right. Excellent. Well, that's all the time we have. I want to respect everyone's afternoon, just getting back to work. But thank you, Mary, so much for sharing all your experiences and knowledge with even the programming part. I know I found that fascinating. We will be sending out a follow-up survey in 1 hour. If you could fill out the survey from that, and we could get you your AIA credits. And then we will be putting this recording of this presentation on the Open Architecture Collaborative YouTube channel, as well as sharing the presentation on SlideShare. So with that, thank you everyone for asking questions. And again, thank you, Mary, for sharing your treasure trove of knowledge on co-housing and the participatory process. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
All right. Take care, everyone.